So the journalist with me, he says, well, I don't understand something. At the beginning of the conversation, you said you wanted to kill off all the Jews, and now you're doing business. You don't understand. First we do business, then we kill them. Now, had it been only a joke, mele, but it seemed like the guy was serious. And that discrepancy is not something that many people can realize or understand. That there are two aspects of working with the people, and one of covering the Palestinian Authority, covering the Palestinian people. One of the essays that I wrote, and I wanted to say this in memory of the Palestinian cameraman that I was working with who died not long ago. 10 years ago, we discovered that our children, our 6-year-olds, were both going into the first grade at the same time. And how interesting that is, that they were born at the same time, and we celebrate, etc. And he was the guy whose house I would go to outside of Ramallah when I was buying the Palestinian school books, and I'd like to have something to drink. And his kids would always find me nice kosher cookies. I like kosher cookies. And we were talking about, my daughter and she knowing all the peace songs. And then I'm hearing his child, his Mustafa, is singing all these songs about Itbach el Yehud, about killing the Jews. Like 4 different versions. But I said to my friend, who was a very loyal and wonderful person, we became very close, a Palestinian cameraman, he would do a job, and if I didn't like the job, he would do it a second time and not charge. Israeli cameramen aren't like that. But at the same time, his child is learning this curriculum that I was buying at the time, summer 2000, which is inculcating the kids to make war on the Jews. He said, it doesn't mean you. Well, I don't know if he doesn't mean me or does mean me, but it was a very difficult thing. And the essay I wrote at the time was when our 2 children start, when Mustafa and Meira start first grade, what he'll be learning and what my child will be learning, and it's very difficult. This is an opportunity to show the movie for the sake of Nakba. It's 24 minutes, and we made this in May. This is the 12th movie that our agency has made. This is the first time that we actually had the camera crew go into an UNRWA camp. We've done things in different aspects of the PA. And it speaks for itself in terms of what it says. And we showed this, its maiden performance was in the U.S. Congress in June. And it raises the question about the Nakba and speaks for itself. People who would like afterwards to get copies would set up through our nonprofit organization in the United States, contribution for a copy. And people would like to feel that it's the kind of thing you'd like to show elsewhere. Happy to do so. We also have a 5-minute version, which is kind of a teaser for people who only want the 5-minute version. We're going to show 24 minutes now, and then we'll have some questions. Eddie, if you can just run the show, and thank you. Visual, not just paper. And that's the function of this movie. UNRWA has issued various and sundry press statements about the movie. They were critical of the fact that we used quotes from the 12th grade textbooks. They didn't mention anything about the 5th grade textbooks. They tried to say that the girl who blew herself up was not an UNRWA student at the time she blew herself up, and we knew that. She was a graduate, and they make no comments about the fact that she was honored. Another criticism, they said, is the murals are not in front of the schools. They said that when this was shown on Israel television 3 weeks ago. So I was interviewed a second time on Israel television. This time I came with a journalist who went back and took the pictures, because it could have been that UNRWA had ordered a whitewash of the murals, but they were still there. The issue to understand is that the definition, as Arafat said in an interview with us in November '96, asked the question to him, in your vision of the future, can people who live in Efrat and Kfar Etzion, Hebron, stay there? He said, sure, because you didn't take any Arab lands. But if you've been from Ramah or Lud, the answer would be different. The maps behind us are very clear. These are maps that we find in the Palestinian schools. The reason why they're in English, we went to the Palestinian map departments, and they're in English. And I interviewed the head of the Palestinian map department. He said they were in English because many of our Palestinians outside of Israel, he didn't say Israel, he said abroad, do not read Arabic. They speak Arabic, they do not read Arabic. And this is a guideline so anyone can locate their homes. People who have computers, you can look at something called PalestineRemembered.com. So there is a developed at the Orient House here, a story I filed 12 years ago when it began with the USAID money, so that anyone could locate his home from 48 and then go back there. The question I asked of David Bedein, the head of the Palestinian refugee, the PLO refugee department, I asked him, well, people are living there. He said, well, they'll have to leave. Well, what if they don't leave? This is on tape. He says, well, we'll have to kill them. And he asked me how I like my coffee. It's a very natural kind of a way of answering very serious questions. Many people talk about the economic boom in Ramallah, but not about the squalor next to Ramallah and 3 refugee camps. The peace movement, which in a sense brought me to Israel, and I'm proud of having come under that framework. The peace movement, the passion of the peace movement 40 years ago concerned the situation in the UNRWA refugee camps. Lova Eliav is the person who just recently passed away. He brought students there into several UNRWA camps to see the squalor and say this has to be taken down. The promise of the Oslo Accords, which were never, as I pointed out before, were never ratified by the PA, but the promise to Israel was that this would be solved. Yossi Beilin on December 8th, 1993, speaking to the foreign press, said he understands that when the Palestinian Authority comes into being in May 1994, they will take down the UNRWA camps and integrate them, and cancel the right of return, except the first decision of the Palestinian Authority was to reinforce the right of return and to explain that people who are in refugee camps do not have the same rights to get housing aid and other aid that people outside of the refugee camps get. So these maps you may want to take a look at at the end of the discussion this evening. If you have any questions or want to throw a tomato at my head or whatever, I'm at your disposal. So any concerns that you may have, or is there any surprises that people feel? Yes?
Since the children are being taught,
yes,
based on what you said,
sure,
the movie we just saw, can there ever be a time, in your opinion, with your knowledge and experience, etc., that you anticipate there may be peace?
There can only be a peace if you have a different kind of education system. That education system could be canceled tomorrow morning. No one is asking that it be canceled. The education system, the Palestinian people are not a monolithic people. Berzeit University did prepare a peace curriculum, which, pointed out earlier, was canceled, was vetoed by the PA. If the Israeli people, and if the Israeli government, and if there's a consensus of Israel to demand that this education system be canceled, then there's a hope. But so long as there's no demand in that respect, and unfortunately, it's not well known, it's not emphasized by too many people who are talking about whether or not houses should go up and communities should not go up. This is a much more serious issue for the future, which should be addressed. And by the way, in Jerusalem, this is the precise curriculum applied in Arab schools in Jerusalem. And when I asked Ehud Omer, the mayor of Jerusalem 10 years ago, when he brought that in, I said, Mr. Mayor, how could you approve of that? He said, his answer was, they can teach what they want, we'll teach what we want. And it's a very serious thing. Greer, please.
We taught our children for 2,000 years to return to Jerusalem. Why should we be surprised if the Palestinians are teaching theirs for 62?
Well, I'll tell you, it's the challenge I appreciate. There is no issue about a sentimentality here. We're talking about a systematic armed struggle that's being taught. And if there was an armed struggle, I mean, for example, when I first came here, I heard a lecture by Rachel Yadai Ben Tzvi. She was the late wife of was the wife of the late President of Israel. And she was talking about Israel's desires for the East Bank of the Jordan and how terrible it was and all this. But I didn't hear, and it was actually not far from here, I heard a lecture by her. She didn't speak in terms of a military struggle, an armed struggle to take it back. She talked about her gaguim, her nostalgia. Many people when they talk about the Palestinian right of return, say, oh, it's only nostalgia, nothing to worry about. What we're talking about here is a systematic plan. People who want to see what this is all about can go to Lod and see 750 homes that have been built with Saudi money, coming from refugee camps to go back to Lod and pushing Jews out of Lod. It was hard to take it seriously, even yours truly. I didn't take it seriously until I saw it with my own eyes. And to understand that this is a serious, lethal threat and not a nostalgic threat, that is the way in which one can look at this issue, and as opposed to it being, well, you know, gaguim is the Israeli term we use, the nostalgia. I don't think that there would be any, as a matter of fact, let me play devil's advocate to myself. When I first worked on this issue of UNRWA, it was because of Lo Eliab and bringing some of us, and then the chapter in the book Siach Lochamim, in English it was called The Seventh Day. That's the chapter about Israeli soldiers who fought in the Six-Day War, and they came back and saw people sitting in the refugee camps living in refugee camps according to where they came from in 48, right? Now, it didn't seem that they had a program to go back. That was more nostalgia. But today, in these Palestinian schools, in the UNRWA camps, children must sit at the classrooms. Since I have an 11-year-old also, the kids have to sit in the classrooms according to where they came from. And when a child is asked, where are you from? You're not from Dahisha, you're not from Dahisha, you're not from Al-Amri, you're from Haifa, etc. And the children learn the idea, or inculcated with the idea, only in the last 10 years, by the way. Only since the new school books and the curriculum came in. And that's the Danatam, the Chafskut, they give them the benefit of the doubt. It wasn't only taught this way, always taught this way. But in the last 10 years have been taught the idea that you're going to go back to Haifa and kill the people who live there. That's fairly serious in terms of an education system. There's never been an education system like that. And even those who compare, and I don't like to use Nazi terms because that often turns people off when you're using Nazi terms. But the Nazi idea was to demonize the Jews. There were never plans of how to do it. It was demonizing and then to quiet. It did not to talk about it if you did it. There wasn't a square in the middle of Berlin for people who had murdered the people in Riga. As a matter of fact, those who have studied the Wannsee agreements, there was recently a documentary about the Wannsee agreement, it showed how the orders was to keep it quiet. Here we have pride shahidid, and one of the first things that the government of Israel could ask in its negotiations this week is to cancel this kind of education. There should not be praise for people who murder Jews as part of your education. It seems so logical. So a long answer to a short question, and a good question.
Okay, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank David for tonight's presentation. And
just to stop you for a second, people who want a copy of the video, a contribution of any kind, no problem, either directly to the center here or send it to an envelope and article here about our work. One of our articles producers the most would be happy with
I think that we certainly fulfilled the 25 years in the media, 40 years in Israel, and 60 years on earth. And as they say on Nev Esrim, until 120.
Another 60 going.